Hello and good afternoon to everyone. It's Dominic Black here from the Cavell Group. We will be starting the audio bridge now. Thank you all for joining. This webinar is really a follow-on from our webinar that we did in November when the Cisco and Broadsoft acquisition was first announced. We've been spending the last few months interviewing Broadsoft providers and getting some insight in them. So we're going to be doing a bit of an update on what the market's saying from a service provider point of view on going forward. So just looking at who we are, many of you will know Cavell. So we've been supporting service providers and vendors across EMEA and North America for the last 13 years, providing a number of different services, as well as research, go-to-market services, supporting them on their commercial decisions as well. So moving forward, just looking a bit at what the Cisco acquisition looked like. So the deal was announced at Broadsoft Connections last year, as I'm sure you're all aware. Broadsoft were purchased for $1.9 billion, $55 per share, and the Broadsoft team is now involved, and their whole reorganization has gone ahead on the 2nd of February. As you can see, the size of the two companies are vastly different, and also their routes to market are pretty different as well. So it will be interesting to see as we go forward what impact that's going to have. So looking at Broadsoft, their position in the market against Cisco. So Broadsoft in most of the European markets owned the tier ones, tier twos, all of the tier ones. So, and they usually have 2 or 3 of those major tier one carriers in there. In the UK, for example, this acquisition now has really pushed on their market share. So our most recent report, which will be out in a couple of weeks on the UK cloud comms market, Cisco's market share was 18% and Broadsoft's was 30%. So combining those together, their market's now increased to over 48% as a total split. Giving them a real solid position in the UK market. Across Europe, their consolidated market position is only 39%. That's because when you look in some of the emerging European markets, they do own the tier 1 and the tier 2s, but they don't, tier 1s, 1 or 2 of the tier 1s, but then they don't own the sort of tier 3s like they do in the UK. So they don't have that penetration down the market. Across the board, Cloud has not had as much success. So most success has really been driven through service providers delivering BroadWorks solutions to end customers or to resellers. So it'll be interesting to see if Cisco's acquisition will drive that Broad Cloud on further moving forward. So we've been doing a bit of interviewing with Broadsoft providers. We interviewed a number in the US and a number across Europe as well. And the mixture of these are some of them are quite small, so have their own BroadWorks switch and delivering quite a few seats here and there, up to large multinational providers as well. So we've got a good mixture across the board of those in the US, those in Europe, and also different sizes. What we've seen as pricing is really a key issue for a lot of the service providers, and whether the pricing model is going to change now that they're with Cisco. And a lot believe that there's going to be a negative impact on pricing going forward in the future. A number of them are really excited about this ability to serve new markets and new market segments. Being able to use the Cisco brand, especially when targeting the mid-market, a lot of service providers who are targeting SME providers, SME customers, which is the main bulk of Broadsoft's base, haven't really been able to move up the stack yet. So really been delivering to the sub 50 market. Being able to use that Cisco brand might give them a bit of gravitas in that space and being able to use that going forward. Interestingly, it's geographically quite similar. So what those service providers in Europe were saying, they were also saying the same kind of things in the US. So the split between the two was not very different there. Interestingly as well, there's a kind of a mixture of those who believe that the overall market development, this deal is going to be good for it, as well as those who believe it's going to be bad. So there's a very kind of split decisions and split across all of these providers on this, whether this is going to be a good deal going forward in the future. So we look and split between providers who have large numbers of Broadsoft users and those providers have a small number of Broadsoft users, what their views are and how they think that this is going to impact them. You can actually see that they're quite different here. On the larger providers, they're really concerned more around the product innovation and service and support levels, whereas on the smaller service providers, they're really interested around how they're actually going to be able to serve new markets and believe that actually this acquisition is going to be good for the overall market development. 50% of the smaller service providers are really worrying about this pricing change, whereas a lot of the larger providers are also worried about the pricing change, but a number of them are also sort of not too worried about how that's going to be in the future. And they're really actually worried about that service and support that they might not be getting from Cisco that they used to get from Broadsoft. This ability to differentiate your service from the competition as well, the larger providers don't really see this as much of a good thing being a Cisco provider now, whereas the smaller providers again are seeing more benefit in that and believe that that's going to be better to differentiate them from the service, differentiate their service in the future. Let's go forward. So from some of our anecdotes from conversations with these service providers, it kind of splits down looking at what they're actually using their Broadsoft switch for. So the tier ones have really been raising concerns, and so a number of them have sort of gone, well, we've got a Broadsoft platform targeting the SME and a Cisco platform targeting large enterprise, and now we're getting all of our platforms all from one provider. So a number of them are actually looking around at sort of, is there an opportunity for a second provider here? Do we need to get one in, or are we quite happy buying all of our licenses from Cisco in the future? As you go down the market as well, not down the market, but as you look at some of the other providers, not the tier ones, who are really using Broadworks as their core call control, but really that most of their development capabilities are built by them or third parties. They don't seem to be too concerned really about the innovation side of things, because they're not really taking too many of Broadsoft's products going forward, apart from just using that call control. So there's a number of those, and a number of US providers raised this, that it's not really going to be too much of a concern for them going forward. Again, licensing may be an issue because that's where their core costs are coming from this. So it'll be interesting to see where they go with that. As you move down the market, and those providers are really dependent on Broadsoft for innovation, and all they're doing is announcing and releasing Broadsoft features that are developed by Broadsoft. They're the ones who are really nervous about the roadmap and whether their development needs will be met by Cisco in the future. There was talk, and when we've spoken to a few of them, they're more excited that they think that the roadmap will be more adhered to and they'll be able to get more regular updates, but they may not be the updates that they're looking for, and they may not have that kind of level of support that they used to from their Broadsoft team. There's also a concern about providers where they're going to fit in this channel hierarchy. So if you are a small Broadsoft provider, and you can typically go to your Broadsoft sales guy and speak to them directly about what you need, you might now be having to buy through a Cisco Gold partner, which could be an issue going forward in the future for some of these, as they're not going to get that relationship and level of service that they used to working with Broadsoft. But talking through that, I think Broadsoft have announced that they're going to keep that partner ecosystem and they're going to keep that kind of level of service with them. So we'll see how that goes forward in the future. So a quick look at the product feature sets. There hasn't still been any real announcements of what's happening or with what features and what products are going to be kept in. We do understand that the UC1 Meet will almost inevitably be absorbed by Cisco WebEx, and that will be the kind of meeting conferences solution going forward in the future. With the contact center piece as well, we've heard that the CC1 will be moved into the contact center space by Cisco, so that will continue to be sold through by them, and nod by the kind of Broadsoft team in that. We also think, and we've heard rumours, that Spark is going to be the de facto team collaboration going forward. So Team One may get moved to the wayside, and Jabber as well may take over from UC1 in that space as well going forward. The target market's still going to be fairly similar, we believe. We haven't seen much indication of Cisco being able to bring HCS down or Hux down. So we still believe that Broadsoft, or the BroadWorks platform, and Broad Cloud will still be delivered to the SME mid-market, and there will be a crossover point in the middle where they both interact, and it'll be up to probably the customer whether they take the Broadsoft or the Cisco solution, depending on what works best for them. So announcements from Broadsoft and Cisco. They haven't had too many announcements since the deal's gone through, but they really reaffirmed their commitment to the service provider channel, and they don't believe that they're going to be competing with their service providers on this. They've also announced that they are going to continue to operate with an open platform, allowing for third-party vendors to integrate and work with their platform in the future. So that's where they expect that's going to be through there. They've just going to hand over now to Matt Townend, who's going to be taking us through the rest of the presentation. So I'm just going to unmute him now, and over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Dom. So just to reiterate a couple of things on the product side, there's been no announcements. They're kind of our opinions, and I think most of them are quite widely held. But we'll wait to see exactly what happens with the product portfolio. In terms of, as Dom mentioned here, in terms of the announcements from Broadsoft, and I met with Mike Tesla, and he at the CCA meeting in Miami. He was very clear that one of the reasons that Cisco obviously bought Broadsoft for its customers, so there's a reaffirmed commitment to that service provider channel and those customers, and also I think it's 7 years where the openness of the platform was also being committed to in terms of APIs. So Dom, do you want to take me to the next slide? What's interesting we saw yesterday in the news is kind of tied into that is obviously yesterday Nuvius announced they are now going to be distributing Cisco as well. We kind of find that's interesting because this is one of the first demonstrations that although the platform is going to stay open and Cisco are committed to that, and Broadsoft are committed to working with the ecosystem of customers, there's an obvious service provider. If service providers are looking for the mid-market, they're obviously going to, in certain circumstances, looking for a total Cisco solution. So they're going to look potentially to buying a full Cisco kit, including handsets, etc. And obviously Nuvius have been a crucial distributor to that audience of Polycom and other handsets. So I think it was quite interesting to see this announcement yesterday that Nuvius are now going to also be distributing Cisco, probably a signifier that there is going to be a demand, whether deliberately not necessarily encouraged by Broadsoft, but by the very fact that this will be a Cisco end-to-end solution. Next slide, please. So what's interesting, obviously, is what's this announcement done as well is really increase the efforts to target service providers by other platforms. Not surprisingly, people are looking to, both service providers are looking at their strategies, and also other vendors are looking to take on Broadsoft and Cisco. As Dom mentioned, in a couple of ways, really, talking to, some tier ones will consider that they don't want to be single sourced. And some of the smaller guys will be considering their position. They're concerned about some of the pricing pieces. So we're seeing, not surprisingly, the other soft switch providers sort of coming into play and looking to push their presence. But what will be interesting in the future is also the amount of wholesale service provider activity from service providers themselves. So obviously Ring have had traditionally sold to BT and AT&T on a wholesale basis, and also recently brought on one of the key sales guys from Broadsoft to re-amplify their wholesale efforts. Blueface and Star to Star have merged, and obviously they've been selling strongly into the wholesale arena. That's how the deal went ahead. People like VoiceWorks in Holland, originally a service provider, and now very much offering that platform. So it'll be interesting. The kind of competition is going to change. There's going to be the soft switch guys, and we're going to see Ribbon, we're going to see Meta, we're going to see Centel pushing it strongly again, I think, using this as an opportunity to push into the market. But also we're going to see some of the increasing efforts from wholesale providers. So next slide. So in terms of sort of summarising what we think, as I said, we had a good discussion at the CCA meeting in Miami recently about this, where I led a panel of service providers, and I think the service providers are really looking for signals. So from Cisco about how they're going to act on the key issues of service and price, and how they're going to be handled in the future. So I think the way that Cisco acts early on in this deal and the message they bring will be crucial to the effect it has and how effective it is moving forward. As we could see from the survey data that we had up front, I mean, there's a lot of indifference in the market about the deal. There's when we're talking about to people, and this may be an English so I apologise to my American colleagues who are on the call, but we've seen the deal kind of have a Marmite effect. Most people are kind of, fairly happy and looking and seeing what's happening. There's some people who are very upset about it, and there's some people who are very happy about it. So I think people are really waiting to kind of see, get some more and more signals from Cisco and Broadsoft over time about what's the impact. And obviously, Cisco have committed to opening up the platform, but as we said already, we're seeing some service providers look to provide a Cisco end-to-end solution. So one of the things that was obvious from the research we did, that pretty much across the board, and particularly among some of the smaller, not the very large enterprises, the opportunity to offer an end-to-end Cisco, they see as an opportunity to move into the mid-market. We've seen a lot of focus from service providers in the last probably 2 to 3 years, and all the service providers talking about how they're moving into the mid-market in all their markets. So they're quite excited about the Cisco end-to-end solution and using the Cisco brand. So I think this will have a positive impact on the Cisco handset business, particularly in the mid-market. That's not to do with anything particularly other than the service provider kind of wanting to use the brand and push into the mid-market. What's interesting, we think, is kind of, Cisco have had a strategy overall about talking about building recurring revenue streams, and it doesn't necessarily balance entirely with this acquisition. Those people who know the Broadsoft business well will know the majority of the service providers and customers have taken the Broadworks perpetual license model. I mean, you'd have to ask them directly, but I would guess it's over 90% of the revenue, if I remember right. There's about 450,000 broad cloud customers in their base, end users in their base. So most of this is actually a perpetual software model. It's not really a recurring revenue other than maintenance model. So it doesn't necessarily entirely balance with that wish to become a recurring revenue type business. So one of the areas that everybody's keeping an eye on is really what happens to the broad cloud business, where broad cloud is offering a recurring revenue opportunity, but then is also competing with service providers. So one of the things that we talked about earlier in the presentation was about channel conflict, and I guess we've heard more about that in the US than we have in Europe, but there is a concern about channel conflict. But in some ways, what people say is Cisco have always been pretty firm on being service provider friendly. So they're fairly confident about that. Particularly the large enterprises, the large service providers are fairly comfortable with that position. So it will be interesting to see kind of what happens to broad cloud and how this purchase of Broadsoft ties into this wish to move to recurring revenues, because on the face of it, it doesn't really strike you as a recurring revenue business for those who really understand the business in detail. Next slide, Dom. We have a question from the floor. Sorry, I'm just going to. Yeah, what becomes of the Broadsoft brand? Has been a question from somebody in the group. Well, what we've seen so far, and if you go onto I hate to say go onto our website because I don't. If you go onto our event that's coming up, which Dom's just put up the website, the page for, you've got the new Broadsoft brand up there, which at the moment looks like a temporary brand, which is Cavell Broadsoft. Broadsoft is now part of Cisco, so you'll see a brand that has Broadsoft on the left and a Cisco on the right. It reminds me of those heady days when I was at places like UNet, and we had UNet WorldCom for a while, or MCI WorldCom, or Combined Band. I think it was fairly clear at the launch that the Cisco brand was going to be pretty predominant. So I expect over time this is a transition that will lead ultimately to the Broadsoft brand disappearing. I don't think it's been a situation. I have not had any indication that it's a situation like WebEx, where the Broadsoft brand is going to continue as a standalone brand. Obviously, Cisco have done that with Meraki, and they did do it with as I say, with WebEx. But the Broadsoft team had been doing quite a lot of work on doing the powered by Broadsoft, but that's only really been in the last year or two. So I don't think there's enough brand equity probably built up there to make a case for keeping that. Thanks for that question. Good opportunity for anybody who's interested in hearing a bit more about what's going on. On the 8th of March, we have our Cloud Comms Summit, and you can see we have all the major vendors speaking, platform guys speaking, and so you can really hear kind of firsthand what they're hearing. And also, Craig Decker is going to do a keynote for 20 minutes as well, which will be fascinating. You'll be able to hear firsthand from him. And I think there may also be a yet to be confirmed Cisco C-level attendee as well, alongside Craig, to give firsthand case of what's happening. So, next slide, Dom. So, just really an opportunity to thank you for coming onto the call. Another thing just to keep your eyes open for, we've obviously got our event on the 8th of March. We've just announced, we'll be announcing, you're the first people to hear, but we'll be announcing on Monday next week that we're taking the Cloud Comms Summit to the US. So on the 27th of June, we'll have the event in partnership with the CCA. So some of you will know the Cloud Comms Alliance, which is the leading association, US and probably the leading international association of cloud comms providers, will be hosting a joint event with Cavell. I'm now one of the board directors of that organization, and we'll be running an event on the 26th and 27th of June. So again, a great opportunity to come out and meet and see what's happening in the different markets. So Dom, unless we have any other questions, if anybody has a questions, they can type it. If not, Dom, have we got any questions from the floor?
Yeah, we've got one question just come up. So based on our research, what do you see as the key reason driving a potential switch either to a white label or another switch? And how hard do you think it would be, and who is best positioned to affect the migration? A kind of two-part question.
Do you want me to go for it first?
I want to go for it.
Okay. So, do you want to give me the first part again? So
what do you see as the key reasons for driving a potential switch to either a white label or another switch?
Okay. I think the key reasons, whether they're reasons which are factual or not, the key concerns are, and the key reasons are potentially around the nervousness around pricing and the commercial side of the deal. Now, a lot of that may be ill-founded or may not be correct, but we'll certainly see in the future. So I think it ties into our research. One of the reasons when we're talking to people is, if they're a smaller guy, they're concerned. Partly some of them because they might already be underwater. So some service providers, smaller service providers who bought quite a lot of licenses from Broadsoft and then had had maintenance tied into those licenses and may have only used a small fraction of them, are concerned about price increases and concerned about service. So there is a commercial amongst some of them. Some of the other people we're talking to are just concerned about being single source. So some of the larger guys, if they've already got a Cisco HCS, there is some concern. Now, I'm not saying it's wide and it's everybody, but there are certainly some cases where I actually know that people are considering new platforms right now, partly because they don't want to be, they're considering it being single sourced. We've got to keep it in context because, as you could see from the research, it's a fairly indifferent. There's some people, as I said, a bit like Marmite. There's some people who are concerned, and there's some people who are very happy, and there's sort of people in the middle who are kind of thinking we'll wait and see. So I think in terms of reasons, it's quite often a commercial reason. It's quite often that they're going to be single sourced. I think the other concern is around innovation. So if there is a concern, and one of the things that you'll see in our UK research, one of the key interesting drivers we just seen in our new research is that service providers are looking at quite a lot at self-development. So they are looking more and more at how they develop around their own, develop their own capabilities. Now, as I talk to some service providers, and those guys who've been in the industry a long time will know, that has often been a wish of service providers that they've not been able to execute against. But there are certainly a number of service providers we talk to who are spending more and more time, and they're quite often the VoIP specialists rather than your traditional sort of tier one telcos, who are looking at differentiating by either building some of their own capabilities around the core, a core switch, or they are looking to integrate point solutions. So I think one of the concerns, although it's again been highlighted very clearly by Cisco that it's not going to be the case, but there's a concern that maybe we might end up sort of tied in here to a solution that isn't as open as it might be elsewhere. Now, again, these are perceptions, not necessarily reality, but they're the things that are coming, I think, strongly through the research. Concerned about commercials and therefore margins and how much money they can make in the future, and therefore should I move to white label? Concerned about being potentially single sourced, or being concerned about wanting to take more control and having more capability to innovate around a solution. And the final one to go to white label is obviously, do they want to take on white label as a kind of a separate decision? They might still white label and go to broad cloud or broad, or another provider is really a different decision, so quite often driven around operational costs. And what was the second part, Dom? Sorry, there was two parts of the question.
And the second part around was how hard do you think it'll be and who's best positioned to affect the migration?
Well, how hard, and there's a few people on the call I recognise who've tried to migrate soft switches over time. I think how hard is dependent on what you're going to and going from. So what we are seeing is some people who are working on migration capabilities and skills. There are companies now that can help you with that. It is still pretty hard. What we tend to see mostly happen is a cap and grow strategy. So when people are going to new platforms, what they will often do is cap the growth on an existing platform, go to a new platform, and then over time look at the migration of customers. We very rarely see a full lift and shift migration. Even when you look at in the UK at somebody like 8x8 and VoiceNet, they didn't migrate all their customers off their old platform immediately onto the new 8x8 platform. What they did was capped and grew on the new 8x8 platform, then over time migrated. So I think that's more likely would be the case for providers, depending who they are. If they're in a real financial difficulty situation and they're worried about the increase in potential, and I say, we heard a different opinion from some guys. So some people, service providers, are saying to us, we like the flexibility, the commercial flexibility with working with Broadsoft. We could do deals. We could do deals at the end of the quarter. We could buy licenses. We're worried that's going to go away. And then I talk to people who work closely with Cisco, say, well, we can do exactly the same deals with Cisco. So I wonder, we'll wait and see how much is a perception and how much is a reality. But I guess they're the kind of reasons, and what we're likely to see is the migration is often can be quite hard, but what we often see is a cap and grow strategy and then a migrate over time capability. Dom, anything to add to that?
I think that's quite a comprehensive cover. Is there any more questions from the floor? You can use the group chat to ask any questions. I don't know if I can see people typing, but...
Okay.
No, I think that's it.
Great. All right. Well, thanks everybody for your time. We've recorded the session, so if anyone wants a copy, you're welcome to ask us for it. Drop a note to Francesca or Dom or myself. And we look forward to seeing a number of you in London. And if you haven't got your tickets, go to our website and you'll find details there of how to get them. Or if not, maybe Washington. We're really excited about the opportunity in Washington. So we hope to meet a number of you there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.